Chapter 1, The City That Speak. Part 1 of Chapter 1. The train eased into Indore Junction without drama, no screeching brakes. No vendors shouting for chai or vada pav. No swarm of bodies pushing past one another with practiced impatience. It stopped as though arriving here required no urgency at all. Mira noticed this immediately. She remained seated for a moment after the train came to rest, her fingers curled tightly around the strap of her handbag. Through the smudged glass window she watched passengers step down calmly, collecting their luggage without haste, without irritation. It unsettled her. Mumbai never allowed calm. Mumbai demanded movement. Ravi stood up beside her, already reaching for the suitcase from the overhead rack. He moved with purpose, with the efficiency of someone whose life was already elsewhere. "Come," he said, "let's go." Voice was neutral, not unkind, not warm either. Mira rose, her joints stiff from the overnight journey, and followed him onto the platform. The air here felt different. Dry, still, lacking the familiar heaviness of the coastal city she had called home for 32 years. This was supposed to be a new beginning. She reminded herself of that as they walked. Outside the station, a man with a thinning moustache waved enthusiastically. "Mr. Mira," he called out. "House broker, I'm Ramesh." Ravi shook his hand briskly. Mira smiled politely. The car ride through the city was quiet, streets wide, buildings low, people unhurried. Mira leaned back against the seat and watched the city unfold, clean sidewalks, silent intersections, shutters half closed even though it was barely noon. "Indore is peaceful," the broker said proudly. "Very good for families." Peaceful. Mira wondered if peaceful was another word for empty. The house stood at the end of a narrow residential lane, shielded from the main road by a row of neem trees. Pale yellow, 2 stories, a small balcony on the first floor, its railing slightly rusted. "Only professionals stay here," Ramesh said as he unlocked the gate. "Good people, no trouble." The gate creaked as it opened. Mira felt it then, a faint tightening in her chest. She dismissed it instantly. Travel fatigue, she told herself. Nothing more inside. The house smelled old, not dirty. Just quiet, as though it had been holding its breath for years. Ravi walked ahead, inspecting the space with practical eyes. "Room's decent," he said. "This can be my study." Mira lagged behind, her fingers brushed the wall near the staircase. The surface was cool, colder than the rest of the house. She paused, frowning, then shook her head slightly and continued. On the terrace, sunlight fell unevenly, casting sharp shadows along the edges. Mira felt exposed up there, as though the sky itself was watching. That night, as they unpacked, Ravi's phone buzzed repeatedly. He turned the screen downward. "Office?" Mira asked casually. He replied too quickly. "New team." She nodded. She always nodded. Part 2 of Chapter 1. The night arrived early in Indore. By 8:30 the street outside had already gone quiet, as though the city believed darkness was something to be respected rather than challenged. Mira stood at the bedroom window, holding the curtain aside just enough to see out. A single street lamp glowed at the corner, its light dull and tired. In Mumbai this hour belonged to life. Vendors would still be shouting. Buses honking, neighbours arguing. Here the silence pressed against the glass. She let the curtain fall. Ravi was in the bathroom, speaking softly into his phone. Mira couldn't hear the words clearly, only the tone, low, intimate, the way people spoke when they didn't want to be overheard. She sat on the edge of the bed, folding her nightgown carefully, her movements slow and deliberate. She remembered the day she resigned. Her office in Andhari had smelled of fresh coffee and printer ink. Her manager had looked surprised. "Are you sure, Mira?" he had asked. "You're one of our most reliable people." She had smiled then too, explained about Ravi's transfer, about priorities shifting, about family. That version of herself felt very far away now. Ravi emerged from the bathroom, towel around his neck. "Let's sleep early," he said. "Big day tomorrow." Mira nodded. They lay side by side in bed, the space between them filled with unsaid things. Ravi turned away, already drifting toward sleep. Mira lay awake, staring at the ceiling fan as it rotated slowly, its shadow stretching and shrinking rhythmically across the wall. The house made sounds, not loud ones, small ones, a click here, a creak there. Settling noises, Ravi would have said. Normal. Mira listened anyway. At some point, she drifted into sleep. She woke suddenly, heart racing. The room was dark. Ravi was asleep. The clock on the bedside table read 2:11 a.m. She lay still, listening. From somewhere below came a soft sound, a scrape. Mira held her breath. It came again, slow, measured, as if something or someone was moving carefully, deliberately across the living room floor. "Ravi," she whispered. He didn't stir. The sound stopped. Silence returned, thicker than before, almost oppressive. Mira lay awake for a long time after that, her body tense, her thoughts racing. Eventually, exhaustion pulled her back under. Morning arrived quietly. Ravi left early, as promised, his goodbye brief, distracted. Mira stood at the door and watched him walk down the lane until he turned the corner and disappeared from sight. That was when she realized something. She had the entire day ahead of her. Alone. She spent the morning unpacking, arranging the kitchen, wiping already clean surfaces. She worked methodically, as if precision could keep unwanted thoughts at bay. By afternoon the house looked lived in, but she didn't feel any more at home. She ventured outside briefly, walking down the lane and back again. The neighbours nodded politely but didn't stop to talk. Everyone seemed contained within their own lives, their own walls. Back inside, the house felt cooler. Mira paused near the staircase again. The same chill brushed against her skin. She frowned, stepping back instinctively. "This place needs sunlight," she muttered aloud. Her own voice startled her. That evening as she cooked, she felt it again, that sensation of being observed, not watched exactly. Acknowledged, she turned abruptly. Nothing, she laughed weakly at herself. Loneliness does strange things, she reminded herself. But as she lay in bed that night, staring at the unfamiliar ceiling, one thought refused to leave her mind. This house knew she was here. Part 3 of Chapter 1. Mira learned the rhythm of the house by the end of the week. Morning light entered reluctantly, filtered through dust and tree branches, never quite reaching the corners of the rooms. The staircase remained untouched by sunlight entirely, as though darkness claimed it by right. The kitchen window faced another building, cutting off any view of the outside world beyond a narrow strip of sky. She woke early every day, out of habit more than necessity. Ravi left the house before 9, carrying his laptop bag and his distance with equal ease. Some mornings he spoke little. On others he spoke just enough to appear present. "Food okay?" he asked one morning, glancing at his phone. Mira replied, "Good." That was the extent of it. Once he left, the house settled into stillness. Not the restful kind, the kind that rang in her ears. Mira tried to impose order on the hours. She created routines: breakfast at 8, cleaning by 9, laundry before noon. She made lists, crossed off tasks that didn't matter. Time stretched regardless. Sometimes she stood at the balcony watching strangers pass by. They walked with purpose, destinations known to them. Mira envied that certainty. By afternoon the loneliness sharpened. She tried calling her mother once, then hung up before the call connected. She didn't want to explain, didn't want to hear concern masked as advice. The house responded in small, unsettling ways. A door she was certain she had closed stood ajar when she passed it again. A cupboard creaked open by itself. The cold near the staircase intensified, wrapping around her ankles like unseen fingers. Each time Mira blamed herself. She was tired, she was adjusting. This was normal, but the feeling persisted. On Friday evening, Ravi returned later than usual. His shirt smelled faintly unfamiliar, not sweat, not soap. Something floral, Mira noticed. "Said nothing. Busy week," he said, loosening his tie. She nodded. They ate dinner in silence, the television murmuring in the background. Ravi's phone buzzed repeatedly. Each time he turned the screen away from her. That night Mira dreamed of stairs again. She was climbing this time, her feet heavy, her breath shallow. The walls closed in as she ascended. At the top a door waited, closed, waiting to be opened. A voice called her name. She woke with a sharp intake of breath. The room was dark. Ravi was asleep. The clock glowed 3:08 a.m. She lay there listening. From below, the unmistakable sound of movement reached her ears, not scraping this time. Footsteps, slow, deliberate, one step. Pause. Another step. Mira's heart pounded violently against her ribs. She sat up, every muscle tense. "Ravi," she called softly. No response. The footsteps stopped. Silence rushed back in, heavier than before. Mira stayed awake until morning, the dawn finally pushing away the night's grip. On Sunday, Ravi announced his plans casually. "I'll be out most of the day," he said, adjusting his watch. "Office stuff." "On Sunday?" Mira asked. He didn't look at her. "Deadlines." Door closed behind him. Mira stood alone in the living room, the weight of the house settling over her shoulders. Sunday stretched endlessly. By evening she found herself sitting at the foot of the staircase, staring upward. The cold seeped into her bones, but she didn't move away. For a brief, terrifying moment she felt it again, that sense of acknowledgement, as if the house had been waiting. Mira stood abruptly, her heart racing. "This is ridiculous," she said aloud. "I'm just lonely." As she turned away, she caught sight of something out of place. A faint mark on the wall near the staircase, thin, uneven, like a crack that hadn't been there before. Mira stared at it for a long time, and somewhere deep within the house something listened. Chapter 2, Sundays Without Sound. Part 1 of Chapter 2. Sunday mornings in Indore were unnervingly quiet. Mira noticed it the moment she opened her eyes. No traffic noise. No distant horns. No shouts from vendors. Even the birds seemed hesitant, their calls sparse and subdued, as if they too respected the stillness of the day. She lay in bed for a long moment, staring at the faint crack in the ceiling above her. The ceiling fan was off. The room felt stale, heavy with air that hadn't moved all night. Ravi slept beside her, sprawled comfortably, one arm flung across his pillow. His phone lay near his hand, face down, as though even in sleep it needed to be hidden. She slipped out of bed quietly. In the kitchen, the clock read 6:27 a.m. too early for a Sunday. Too early for someone with nowhere to go, Mira began preparing breakfast out of habit. The clatter of utensils sounded intrusive in the silence, as if she were disturbing something that preferred to remain undisturbed. She turned the gas on low, moved carefully, almost apologetically. By the time Ravi emerged, freshly showered and dressed, the poha was ready. "Morning," she said. "Morning," he replied, already checking his phone. They ate without speaking. The television murmured faintly in the background, a news anchor's voice filling gaps that neither of them seemed willing to address. Ravi glanced at his watch. "I might step out for a bit," he said casually. Mira's fingers tightened around her spoon. "Where office work," he said. "Just for a few hours." She nodded. He kissed her cheek lightly, an automatic gesture practiced, empty, and left. The door clicked shut. The silence rushed in immediately. Mira stood at the dining table long after Ravi had gone, staring at the chair he had occupied moments ago. It already felt distant, as though he hadn't been there at all. She cleaned the kitchen slowly. Too slowly. Every task stretched, elongated by the absence of time's structure. By late morning she had run out of excuses to stay busy. She wandered into the living room and sat on the sofa, folding her legs beneath her. The house felt different on Sundays. Heavier, as though the walls relaxed once Ravi left, releasing something they kept restrained during the week. The air near the staircase was noticeably colder. Mira avoided looking at it. She picked up a book she had brought from Mumbai, one she had loved once. She read the same page 3 times without absorbing a word. Eventually she placed it back on the table. Her phone buzzed. For a moment hope flared. It was a message from a former colleague. "How's Indore treating you?" Mira stared at the screen, typed a reply, deleted it, typed again, "Fine." Settling in, she sent it and immediately regretted how small the words felt. By afternoon the house seemed to close in around her. The walls felt nearer, the ceiling lower. Even the furniture appeared misplaced, unfamiliar, as though it belonged to someone else's life. Mira paced from room to room, barefoot steps echoing faintly. That was when she heard it. A sound from upstairs. She stopped walking. It wasn't loud, it wasn't sudden. It was subtle, like the soft shifting of weight, the way a person moved carefully to avoid being noticed. Mira's heart began to pound. "Ravi," she called out, even though she knew better. No answer. She remained still, straining to listen. The sound didn't repeat. Instead, a faint chill spread outward from the staircase, crawling along the floor. Mira wrapped her arms around herself. "This is what loneliness does," she muttered. "It plays tricks." Still, she didn't move toward the stairs. Sunday afternoon stretched endlessly. When Ravi finally returned, it was nearly dark. "You okay?" he asked, loosening his shoes. "Yes," Mira said automatically. He nodded, already distracted, already elsewhere. That night, as Mira lay awake listening to the house settle around her, one thought pressed insistently against her mind. Sundays weren't quiet here. They were watchful. Part 2 of Chapter 2. By midweek, Mira could no longer ignore the weight pressing down on her chest. It wasn't fear exactly. Fear had edges. This was something softer, more insidious, an erosion, a quiet wearing away of certainty. The house didn't threaten her, it absorbed her. On Wednesday afternoon she forced herself to step outside. She locked the door carefully behind her, the click of the latch sounding louder than it should have. The lane was nearly empty. A woman 2 houses down swept her front steps, her movements efficient, practiced. Mira offered a tentative smile. The woman nodded once and returned to her work. Mira walked farther than she had before, past the row of similar-looking houses, toward a small grocery shop at the corner. Inside, the shopkeeper barely glanced at her as she paid for milk and bread. "No one talks much here," he said, noticing her hesitation. "People keep to themselves." Mira smiled politely. She wondered how long she could do the same. Back in the house, the silence greeted her like a familiar presence. She placed the groceries on the counter and leaned against it, suddenly exhausted. That night, Ravi ate quickly and retreated to the bedroom with his laptop. "Deadline," he said. Mira sat alone in the living room, television off, lights dimmed. The staircase loomed in her peripheral vision. She tried not to look at it. Tried not to remember the sound from Sunday. Around 10, the air shifted. The fan slowed slightly, then resumed its pace. The lights flickered once, twice, then steadied. Mira felt the change immediately, a pressure in her ears like the moments before a storm. She stood. The cold was stronger now, concentrated at the base of the stairs. It crept across the tiles, numbing her feet. Mira took one step backward, then another. Her back hit the wall. "This isn't real," she whispered. "I'm just tired." A sound reached her ears, not footsteps, a breath, slow, controlled, close. Mira's breath hitched. She turned sharply. The living room was empty. She laughed then, short, hysterical. The sound echoed unnaturally, bouncing off the walls and returning to her ears distorted. She fled to the bedroom, closing the door behind her with more force than necessary. Ravi glanced up from his laptop. "What's wrong?" "Nothing," she said too quickly. "Just tired." He nodded and returned to his screen. That night Mira dreamed she was standing in the living room, unable to move. The staircase stretched upward endlessly, disappearing into darkness. A figure stood at the top watching her. She woke gasping. The clock read 3:19 a.m. Her mouth was dry. Her heart raced violently. She lay still, listening. From the hallway came a soft sound, a whisper, not words, just the suggestion of a voice. Mira pressed her hands over her ears. By morning she was convinced she was losing her mind. She considered calling her mother. Considered asking Ravi to move. Considered packing a bag and returning to Mumbai alone. But each option felt heavier than staying. Sunday arrived again too soon. Ravi announced another office matter and left before noon. Mira stood in the doorway long after he was gone, staring at the empty street. When she turned back inside, the house felt different, expectant. She moved slowly through the rooms, heart pounding, senses sharpened. The air near the staircase was icy now, undeniable. Mira sat on the sofa and waited. For what she didn't know, time passed, or maybe it didn't. Then from the corner of her vision she noticed movement, a shadow where there should have been none. She turned, nothing. But she knew then, with a certainty that settled deep in her bones, that she was no longer alone. And whoever, or whatever, was sharing the house with her was growing tired of waiting. Part 3 of Chapter 2. By the time evening arrived, Mira had stopped pretending she was fine. The house had changed its posture. She couldn't explain it any other way. The walls felt alert, attentive, as though they were no longer passive structures but witnesses waiting for something to unfold. Even the furniture seemed misaligned, casting longer shadows than they should have. Mira stood in the kitchen, staring at the gas stove without lighting it. She wasn't hungry. She hadn't been hungry all day. Her phone lay on the counter beside her. No messages, no missed calls. Ravi hadn't checked in once. She imagined him somewhere brightly lit, surrounded by voices, laughter, life continuing without her presence required. The thought hollowed her out. She carried a glass of water into the living room and sat on the sofa, her back straight, her hands folded tightly in her lap. The television remained off. Noise felt intrusive now, almost disrespectful. The staircase drew her attention again. She tried to ignore it. Minutes passed, then came the sound, not from above. Behind her, Mira froze. Her heart slammed violently against her ribs, so hard she was certain it must be audible. The sound wasn't loud, just a faint disturbance in the air, like someone shifting position carefully. She did not turn around. Her skin prickled, every instinct screaming at her to run, yet her body refused to obey. The air grew colder, pressing against the back of her neck, raising goosebumps along her arms. "Stop," she whispered, her voice barely audible. The sound ceased. Silence returned, heavy and suffocating. Mira exhaled shakily and stood, forcing herself to move. She paced the room once, twice, grounding herself in motion. This was exhaustion, she told herself, isolation, nothing more. She went upstairs and shut the bedroom door firmly behind her. For the first time since arriving in Indore, she locked it. She sat on the bed, knees drawn to her chest, staring at the door. Her mind replayed every sound, every shadow, every inexplicable chill. She felt ridiculous and terrified at the same time. When Ravi finally returned, it was well past 10. She heard his keys, his footsteps, normal sounds, living sounds. Relief flooded her so suddenly it brought tears to her eyes. "You're late," she said, emerging from the bedroom. "Meeting ran long," he replied, not meeting her gaze. She studied him, his relaxed posture, his casual detachment. He looked untouched by the house, unaffected by its moods. "Ravi," she said quietly, "do you ever feel strange here?" He paused, frowning. "Strange how? I don't know," she said, choosing her words carefully. "Uncomfortable, like something's off," he sighed. "You need to get out more," he said. "You're overthinking." Dismissal hurt more than she expected. That night Mira didn't sleep. She lay awake, eyes open, listening. At 3:14 a.m. she heard it clearly, footsteps on the stairs, slow, deliberate, unmistakably real. One step, pause, another. Her breath came in shallow gasps. She squeezed her eyes shut, tears slipping silently into her hair. The footsteps stopped outside the bedroom door. The handle did not turn. Nothing entered. After a long moment, the presence withdrew, retreating back down the stairs. Mira stared at the ceiling until dawn. By morning, her decision was made. If she stayed much longer like this, something inside her would break permanently. As Ravi left for work, she stood at the doorway and watched him go, her expression unreadable. Tuesday was approaching. She didn't know why that mattered, but the house did, and it was waiting. Chapter 3, Tuesday night. Part 1 of Chapter 3. Tuesday arrived disguised as an ordinary day. Mira woke before the alarm, her body already tense, as though it had sensed something her mind had not yet accepted. The light outside was dull and grey, neither morning nor night, suspended in an in-between state that mirrored her thoughts. She lay still, listening. The house was quiet, too quiet. Ravi moved beside her, groaning softly as he sat up. He reached for his phone immediately, scrolling through messages with narrowed eyes. Mira watched him from the corner of her vision. "You're leaving early?" she asked. He replied without looking at her. "Outstation work." Her fingers tightened around the bedsheet. Again, this one's important. Are you going? He hesitated for a fraction of a second, so brief it might have gone unnoticed by anyone else. Mira noticed, he said. Client review might stay overnight. Something inside her sank quietly. "'Kay," she said. She followed him into the kitchen, moving on instinct. She prepared tea while he checked emails, his attention firmly elsewhere. "What time will you be back?" she asked. "Late," he said. "Don't wait up." The words felt rehearsed. As Ravi packed his bag, Mira leaned against the doorframe watching him. He moved efficiently, confidently, like someone escaping rather than departing. "Ravi," she said suddenly. He looked up, irritation flickering briefly across his face. "Yes, do you still like this house?" she asked. He frowned. "What kind of question is that? I mean, does it feel okay to you?" He zipped the bag shut. "You're overthinking again." Dismissal landed harder than he realized. By the time Ravi left, the sky had darkened unnaturally for late afternoon. Thick clouds gathered overhead, pressing low against the rooftops. Mira stood at the window, watching the lane empty once more. She was alone. The realization felt final this time. As evening settled, the house began to shift, not visibly, not audibly at first, just a subtle tightening in the air as though the space itself was drawing inward. Mira turned on every light, moving deliberately, refusing to acknowledge the growing discomfort in her chest. At 7:38 p.m. the power went out. The lights blinked once, twice, and then darkness swallowed the house whole. Mira gasped involuntarily. She stood frozen, heart racing, the silence roaring in her ears. Outside, no generator hummed, no neighbor shouted. The street lamp remained dead. She fumbled for her phone. No signal. Her breath came faster. "This happens," she muttered aloud. "It's normal." Her voice sounded strange, thin, uncertain, swallowed by the dark. She lit a candle in the kitchen, the small flame trembling violently as though reacting to more than just air. Shadows leapt onto the walls, stretching and distorting familiar shapes into something foreign. The cold arrived immediately. It seeped in through the floor, climbed her legs, wrapped around her waist. Mira hugged herself tightly, teeth chattering despite the closed windows. She carried the candle into the living room. The staircase loomed ahead, darker than the rest of the house, its outline barely visible. Mira avoided looking at it. She sat on the sofa, candle placed carefully on the table, her eyes fixed straight ahead. Every sound, her breathing, the faint drip of water from the kitchen tap, felt amplified. Then she heard it, a sound that made her blood run cold, a slow exhale, not hers, close, very close. Mira stood abruptly, knocking the candle slightly. Wax spilled onto the table, the flame flickering wildly. "Who's there?" she demanded, her voice shaking despite her effort to sound firm. Silence. Then a single footstep from the staircase. Mira backed away, her heart slamming violently against her ribs. She whispered, "Please." The temperature dropped sharply. Her breath fogged faintly in the candlelight. Another step, closer. Mira's legs trembled, her body caught between terror and disbelief. And then in the dim glow of the candle, she saw movement at the base of the stairs, a shape, human, still, watching. Part 2 of Chapter 3. Mira could not move. Her body refused every command her mind screamed at it. She stood rooted to the spot, candle clutched in her trembling hand, its flame guttering wildly as though even it wished to flee. The shape at the base of the staircase did not advance, it remained still. Watching, in the faint, uneven light, Mira began to make out details, too many details for comfort. A man's outline. Tall, narrow shoulders. Clothes that seemed strangely out of place, as though they belonged to another time entirely. Her throat closed. "This isn't happening," she whispered. "This isn't real." The candle flame bent sharply, almost horizontal. The air grew colder. The figure moved, not forward, into the light. Mira's breath tore from her chest in a strangled sob. His face was pale, not sickly, but drained, as though life had been carefully removed rather than violently taken. His eyes were dark and steady, holding none of the wildness she had expected. If anything, they looked tired, so terribly tired. Mira screamed. The sound tore out of her, raw and uncontrolled, echoing off the walls before collapsing back onto her. She stumbled backward, her heel catching on the edge of the rug, and fell hard onto the floor. The candle rolled away, extinguishing itself with a soft hiss. Darkness swallowed everything. She sobbed, scrambling blindly. "No, no, no." The lights flickered back on suddenly. Mira froze. The man was still there, standing exactly where he had been, real, unchanged, unimpressed by the return of electricity. She stared at him, her chest heaving, tears streaming down her face. Her mind raced through every explanation it could find, hallucination, stress, exhaustion, but each one collapsed under the weight of what stood before her. He raised his hands slowly. A placating gesture. "Please," he said, his voice was calm, human. "Scream again." Sound of his voice broke something inside her. Mira sobbed openly now, her body shaking violently as terror and disbelief tangled together. She pressed herself against the floor as far from him as the room allowed. "Who are you?" she cried. "What do you want?" The man hesitated, as though unsure how much truth she could bear. "Name," he said gently, "is Shekhar." The name felt wrong in the room, too ordinary. Too human. This is my house, he continued. Or it was. Mira's vision blurred. You're dead, she whispered. You have to be. Shekhar's gaze softened. He said simply. The word landed without drama, without denial, without apology. Mira let out a broken laugh that bordered on hysteria. I'm dreaming, she said. I finally lost my mind. You're awake, Shekhar replied, and you're not alone anymore. Something about the way he said it anymore made her chest ache. I didn't want you to see me like this, he added, but you kept listening. Mira shook her head violently. She whispered, I never wanted this. I know, Shekhar said. He took a careful step forward. Mira recoiled instantly, scrambling backward. Come, stopped. I won't touch you, he said quietly. I can't. And even if I could, I wouldn't. The certainty in his voice steadied her just slightly. Why are you here? She asked hoarsely. Shekhar glanced toward the staircase, then back at her. Because I died here, he said, and because I couldn't leave. A long silence followed. Mira slowly pushed herself upright, never taking her eyes off him. Her limbs felt weak, unreliable, but she forced herself to sit. If you're real, she said shakily, prove it. Shekhar nodded. He turned toward the wall near the staircase, the same wall Mira had noticed days ago, the faint crack. She watched in horror as the air around it shimmered slightly, the crack darkening, widening just enough to reveal something beneath the paint. A stain, browned with age, dried. Mira covered her mouth. That wasn't there before, she whispered. It's always been there, Shekhar said. You just started seeing it. Her stomach twisted violently. I didn't mean to scare you, he said. I've waited a long time. Most people don't hear me. Do I? She asked. Shekhar looked at her with an expression that mirrored her own loneliness so precisely it stole her breath. Because, he said softly, you know what it feels like to be forgotten. The words shattered her. She sat there on the cold floor, face streaked with tears, staring at the dead man who knew her better than her living husband ever had. And Tuesday night closed around them both. Part 3 of Chapter 3. For a long time, neither of them spoke. The house seemed to hold its breath, as if aware that something irreversible had occurred. The ceiling fan hummed softly now, electricity restored, the ordinary sound jarringly out of place after what Mira had witnessed. She remained seated on the floor, her back against the sofa, her knees drawn close to her chest. Every few seconds her eyes flicked toward Shekhar, half expecting him to vanish the way logic demanded he should. He didn't. He stood near the staircase, not advancing, not retreating, respecting the invisible boundary fear had drawn between them. You can sit on the sofa, he said gently. You don't have to stay there. Mira let out a short, disbelieving laugh. You think I'm worried about comfort right now? He inclined his head slightly. Fair. Her heartbeat slowly began to steady, though her body still trembled. Shock, she realized dimly, had its own rhythm. If you're here, she said slowly, choosing each word with care, then everything I've felt since moving into this house, it wasn't in my head. No, Shekhar replied, it wasn't. The confirmation sent a shiver through her, not of fear this time, but of grim validation. I tried not to interfere, he continued. Most of the time I just exist, the sounds, the cold. Those aren't intentional. You mean you can't control it, Mira said. Not completely, he admitted. Strong emotions, memories, they bleed into the space. Mira looked around the living room, the furniture, the walls, the staircase. So this house remembers you, she said. Yes. The word carried a weight that made her throat tighten. She stood slowly, her legs weak but obedient. She kept a safe distance, her movements cautious, deliberate. If you're dead, she said, why haven't you moved on? Shekhar's expression changed, the calm dimmed, replaced by something sharper, unresolved. Because I was murdered, he said. The word landed like a blow. Mira felt her breath leave her body in a rush. Murdered, he nodded once, 10 years ago, in this house. Her gaze drifted to the staircase involuntarily. No one knows, he continued. They made sure of that. Who? Mira asked, though part of her already sensed the answer wouldn't be simple. Wife, Shekhar said quietly, and the man she loved more than me. Mira closed her eyes. Betrayal, she realized, echoed loudly, whether among the living or the dead. I'm not here to hurt you, Shekhar said after a moment. You need to understand that. Then why reveal yourself now? She asked. Because you were starting to break, he replied, and because you listen. Truth of it made her chest ache. I don't want to be afraid of my own house, Mira whispered. Shekhar looked at her with something close to regret. I never wanted that for anyone. Settled again, different now, less hostile, still heavy but no longer suffocating. I won't appear like this again unless you want me to, Shekhar said. I can stay quieter. Mira studied him. You can choose that, she asked. He replied, now that you've seen me. A strange calm spread through her, born not of acceptance but of exhaustion. Fear had burned through her reserves, leaving something quieter in its place. What do you want from me? She asked. Shekhar hesitated. For now, he said carefully, nothing. She frowned, but eventually he met her gaze fully. Eventually, he said, I'll ask you to help me tell the truth. The words settled heavily in the room. And if I say no, Mira asked. I'll understand, he said, but I won't be free. Free, the word echoed in her mind long after he fell silent. Shekhar stepped back slowly, his form dimming slightly as though receding into the fabric of the house itself. Try to sleep, he said softly. Tuesday night is over. Then he was gone, not vanished, withdrawn. The living room felt emptier without him. Mira stood alone, staring at the staircase, her mind racing, her reality permanently altered. Somewhere far away, Ravi slept peacefully, unaware that his wife had just crossed a line she could never step back from. Mira turned off the lights and walked slowly toward the bedroom. For the first time since arriving in Indore, she knew one thing with absolute certainty. She was no longer alone. And the truth, when it came, would demand a price. Chapter 4, The Man in The Shadows. Part 1 of Chapter 4. Mira did not sleep. She lay on her side, eyes open, staring at the faint outline of the bedroom door until the darkness slowly softened into grey. Her body remained tense, as if bracing for something to happen again, something that had already happened and could not be undone. The house was quiet, not the heavy, oppressive quiet she had grown used to, but a cautious one. As though it too was uncertain how to behave now that its secret had been acknowledged, she turned her head slightly. Ravi slept peacefully beside her, his breathing deep and even. His face looked relaxed, untouched by the terror that had cracked her world open only hours earlier. Mira studied him in the dim light, searching for something, guilt perhaps or awareness. There was nothing. An unfamiliar distance settled in her chest. When morning finally arrived, it did so without ceremony. No dramatic sunrise, no cleansing light, just another pale day. Ravi woke first. Why are you up so early? He asked, glancing at the clock. I didn't sleep well, Mira replied. He nodded absently, already checking his phone. I'll be late tonight too, he said. Lot of pressure right now. She watched him get dressed, the routine movements strangely detached from her now. The man she had once structured her life around felt peripheral. When he left, Mira did not follow him to the door. She remained seated on the bed, hands resting limply in her lap, listening to his footsteps fade. Only when the gate closed did she exhale fully. The house felt different in daylight, less threatening, more revealing. Mira moved through the room slowly, deliberately, as though reacquainting herself with a place she had misjudged. The staircase no longer radiated cold, but she avoided it anyway. She made tea and carried her cup into the living room. That was when she felt it, not fear, awareness. You don't have to hide, she said quietly. The words surprised her even as she spoke them. The air near the staircase shifted, subtle as a breath being drawn. The temperature dipped slightly. Shekhar appeared, not fully, not suddenly, but gradually, as though emerging from the fabric of the space itself. Less solid than the night before, less imposing. He stood near the wall, his outline faint, his presence subdued. I didn't want to frighten you again, he said. Mira's grip tightened around the cup, but she didn't drop it. You didn't, she replied, then paused. Not today. They regarded each other in silence. Do you remember everything from last night? Shekhar asked. Mira said. Unfortunately, a faint hint of something crossed his face. Regret, perhaps. I'll stay distant, he said. You need time. No, she said suddenly. The word came out sharper than she intended. Shekhar looked at her, surprised. If I pretend this didn't happen, she continued, I'll start doubting myself again. I can't do that, she swallowed. Stay, she finished. Just don't do anything unexpected. Nodded once, as you wish. The calmness of his acceptance unsettled her more than fear ever had. They did not speak for a long while after that. Mira sat on the sofa, staring at the wall opposite her. Shekhar remained in the shadows, unobtrusive, present but restrained. The house existed around them, neither hostile nor welcoming, simply observant. You said you were murdered, Mira said finally. Shekhar did not answer immediately. He said after a moment. But not today, she nodded. I don't think I could handle that today either. A strange, fragile understanding settled between them. For the first time since moving to Indore, Mira felt something unfamiliar stir within her, not comfort but clarity. Part 2 of Chapter 4. By afternoon, Mira realized something unsettling. She was functioning. The house no longer felt like a trap. The walls hadn't closed in. The staircase remained still, silent. Whatever terror had ruled the previous nights had withdrawn, replaced by a watchful calm. She cooked lunch slowly, deliberately. The clink of utensils, the hiss of the stove, ordinary sounds that anchored her to the living world. She ate alone at the dining table, aware of Shekhar's presence without seeing him. You don't eat anymore, do you? She asked suddenly. Shekhar's voice came from near the window, faint but clear. No, do you miss it? There was a pause. I miss forgetting that I'm dead. Honesty of the answer startled her. Mira washed the dishes in silence, her thoughts drifting in unwanted directions. Every action felt heavier now, as though meaning had attached itself to things that once required none. In the late afternoon, Ravi called. I'll be late again, he said, irritation threading his voice. Don't wait for dinner. Mira leaned against the counter, phone pressed to her ear. Ravi, when did your work become more important than us? There was a sharp intake of breath on the other end. This again, he snapped. You're at home all day, you don't understand pressure. The line went dead. Mira stared at the phone long after the call ended. You didn't imagine that either, Shekhar said quietly. She flinched. What, the distance, he continued. It didn't begin here, it began long before this house. Mira sat down slowly, the strength leaving her legs. You watch us, she said. It wasn't an accusation, it was a realization. I notice patterns, Shekhar replied. I don't intrude unless I must. Then tell me something, she said, her voice low. Is he lying to me? Shekhar hesitated. He said finally. The word landed softly, but its impact was devastating. Mira felt a strange calm settle over her, the way people sometimes felt just before a storm broke. About what? About where he goes, Shekhar said. About who he talks to. Mira closed her eyes. 1,000 moments rearranged themselves in her mind. Late nights, hidden phone screens, unfamiliar perfume. She had seen them all. She had chosen not to look too closely. Why tell me now? She asked. Because denial kept me here for 10 years, Shekhar said. I won't let it destroy you too. She opened her eyes, tears blurring her vision. You're asking me to trust a dead man over my husband. Shekhar did not flinch. I'm asking you to trust what you already know. The house seemed to lean in around them, absorbing the truth. Mira stood and walked toward the staircase, stopping just short of the first step. You're not the only one trapped here, are you? She said quietly. Shekhar replied. You just arrived later. The words stayed with her long after the afternoon light faded. That night, Ravi returned late, distracted, restless. Mira watched him with new eyes now, noticed how his stories lacked detail, how his irritation surfaced too quickly. She said nothing. Shekhar remained silent too, but Mira felt it then, the shift. The house was no longer merely observing, it was aligning. Part 3 of Chapter 4. That night, Mira did not pretend. She lay awake beside Ravi, listening to the familiar rhythm of his breathing, but it no longer comforted her. Every rise and fall of his chest felt mechanical, detached from her presence. She wondered how long this distance had existed, how long she had mistaken routine for intimacy. When Ravi's phone buzzed softly on the bedside table, Mira stiffened. He stirred, turned slightly, and silenced it without opening his eyes. She stared at the dark ceiling. Somewhere in the house a floorboard creaked, not sharply, not as a warning. Just enough to remind her that she was not alone in her awareness. By morning, Mira felt strangely clear-headed, not calm, not healed, but awake. Ravi left without much conversation, distracted as always. Mira watched him from the doorway this time, her gaze steady, observant. When the gate closed behind him, she didn't feel the familiar emptiness rush in. Instead, she felt resolve. She moved through the house deliberately, touching the walls, the furniture, grounding herself in the physical reality of the place. When she reached the staircase, she stopped. Tell me the truth, she said quietly. The air shifted. Shekhar appeared near the landing, his presence subdued but attentive. You already know part of it, he said. Mira replied. I want to know how much of my life I've been living with my eyes closed. Shekhar regarded her for a long moment. He isn't careful, he said finally. He thinks you won't look. Mira's jaw tightened. Does he bring her here? Shekhar shook his head. No, not here. A strange relief flickered through her, followed immediately by anger at herself for feeling it. Does he love her? She asked. Shekhar hesitated. He said, the word cut deeper than Mira expected. She pressed her hand flat against her chest, breathing slowly through the pain. And me? She asked, almost against her will. Shekhar's voice softened. He is used to you. Mira let out a short, bitter laugh. I built my entire life around being reliable, she said. I thought that was love. She sank onto the bottom step of the staircase, exhaustion suddenly flooding her body. I don't want to become angry, she said. I don't want to become bitter. Shekhar moved closer, not physically but perceptibly, his presence warming the cold air just slightly. Anger isn't what changes people, he said. Clarity does. She looked up at him. And what did clarity do to you? He did not answer immediately. It kept me here, he said finally. But it also kept me sane. Mira absorbed that the house was quiet, listening, waiting. What happens now? She asked. Now, Shekhar said, you watch, you listen, you stop excusing what hurts you. Mira nodded slowly. That evening, Ravi returned home later than usual. He spoke animatedly about work, about stress, about deadlines. Mira listened attentively, nodding at the right moments, but something fundamental had shifted. She was no longer trying to preserve the illusion, she was observing. When Ravi went to sleep, Mira remained awake, staring at the faint crack near the staircase. The one she now knew concealed more than paint could hide. She thought of Shekhar, of betrayal, of years lost to silence, and she made a quiet promise to herself she would not disappear inside this house, not like him, not anymore. Chapter 5, the story of the dead. Part 1 of Chapter 5. Shekhar did not begin with his death. He began with love. Mira noticed this immediately, the way his voice softened when he spoke, the way the air around him seemed to warm, not physically but emotionally. Whatever pain he carried had been layered on top of something that was once sincere, once hopeful. I wasn't always like this, he said quietly. They were sitting in the living room, though neither of them truly sat in the same way. Mira occupied the sofa, her legs tucked beneath her, a cup of untouched tea cooling on the table. Shekhar stood near the window, his form faint but steady. I know, Mira replied. He glanced at her. You do. No one becomes a ghost because they were empty, she said. You had something to lose, Shekhar smiled faintly. I met Nandini at a wedding, he began. One of those loud, chaotic ones. I noticed her laugh before I noticed her face. Mira closed her eyes briefly, picturing it. She was wearing blue, he continued. Not the traditional kind, something modern, confident. She spoke to everyone like she belonged anywhere she stood. He paused. I liked that. Mira felt a quiet ache in her chest. She recognized that kind of admiration, the innocent kind, the kind that didn't yet know it would one day hurt. We married within a year, Shekhar said. Everyone said it was fast. I said it felt right. Did it? Mira asked. He replied without hesitation. For a long time. He told her about the early years, the rented flat before the house, shared meals, small arguments that ended in laughter. He spoke of coming home tired and still wanting to talk. Of weekends spent planning a future that seemed solid. I trusted her completely, he said. I never checked her phone, never questioned where she went. Mira swallowed. She used to say I was too good, Shekhar continued. I thought it was a compliment. First change, he said, had been subtle, longer phone calls, new friends, a restlessness he couldn't place. When he asked, she smiled and said he worried too much. I believed her, he said, because believing her kept my world intact. Mira leaned forward slightly. Vicky, she asked. Shekhar's expression darkened. He was introduced as a colleague, he said. Charming, loud, the kind of man who filled space easily. Shekhar had welcomed him into his home. I made tea for him, he said quietly. Sat across from him, listened to him talk about loyalty. Mira felt something cold twist inside her. For almost a year, Shekhar said, I lived with a lie so complete that it reshaped reality. Described the nights Nandini came home late, the way she turned away in bed, the impatience in her voice when he tried to talk. She didn't stop loving me, Shekhar said. She stopped seeing me. Mira understood that distinction painfully well. I asked her once if there was someone else, he said. She laughed. Sound of that laughter echoed faintly in the house, though neither of them had made it. She said I was paranoid, he continued. That I was insecure, that I should be grateful. Mira closed her eyes. By the time the truth surfaced, Shekhar said it was no longer just betrayal, it was calculation. They needed me gone, he said. The words landed heavily between them. Outside, evening settled over the house, the light fading gradually. The staircase remained quiet, but the walls felt closer now, listening. She didn't just cheat, Shekhar said softly. She planned. Mira opened her eyes, dread pooling in her stomach. Tell me, she said, but slowly. Shekhar nodded. The worst part, he said, was that I never stopped loving her, even when I should have. Mira realized then that this story was not just about murder, it was about how love, once betrayed, could turn lethal. Part 2 of Chapter 5, the year before Shekhar died, did not announce itself as the end. It arrived quietly, disguised as normalcy. At first, he said, I thought marriage simply changed after a few years, that comfort replaced excitement, that this was what stability looked like. Mira listened without interrupting, her hands clasped tightly together. The room felt heavier now, as though memory itself had weight. Nandini stopped arguing, Shekhar continued. That should have worried me, instead I felt relieved. He described evenings when she sat beside him without really being there, her eyes fixed on her phone, her responses delayed, her laughter reserved for someone not in the room. She began correcting me, he said, the way I spoke, the way I dressed, the way I existed. Mira felt a familiar sting. When I tried to be affectionate, Shekhar said, she accused me of being needy. The house seemed to absorb that word, needy. She started staying out late, he continued. Work dinners, team outings, emergencies, each excuse came neatly wrapped, rehearsed just enough to sound believable. Vicky, Mira asked quietly. Shekhar's jaw tightened. He became unavoidable, he said. Always around, always helpful. Vicky arrived with groceries when Shekhar was unwell. Offered to drive Nandini when Shekhar worked late. Sat comfortably in their living room, feet stretched out, voice confident. He looked at me like I was temporary, Shekhar said. I just didn't understand it yet. First undeniable crack came one night when Shekhar returned home earlier than expected. The house was quiet, he said. Too quiet. Nandini's phone lay on the table, vibrating softly. Shekhar hadn't meant to look, he had never looked before, but the name on the screen wasn't his. Vicky, he didn't open the message, he didn't need to. She walked in seconds later, Shekhar said. Saw the phone in my hand. Mira held her breath, she didn't deny it, he continued. She didn't apologize either. Instead, Nandini had sighed, as if exhausted by his presence. She said I was making a big deal out of nothing, Shekhar said, that it had been over for months between us, that I just hadn't noticed. Mira felt anger rise sharply in her chest. She told me she was unhappy, Shekhar said, that I suffocated her, that I was boring. The words came out flat, stripped of emotion by repetition. I asked her if she loved him, Shekhar said. She had smiled, a small, pitying smile. She said love wasn't the point anymore. Mira felt sick. I should have left, Shekhar said, but I didn't. Mira asked, though she already knew. Because the house was in my name, he said. Because my life was there, because I still believed she might come back. Hope, Mira realized, could be lethal. She changed after that, Shekhar continued. Not kinder, sharper. Arguments turned public. Insults became casual. She corrected him in front of others. Vicky began staying late, then overnight, always with excuses. They spoke in code, Shekhar said, right in front of me. Humiliation burned deeper than anger ever could. She started saying things like accidents happen, he added quietly. Mira looked up sharply. She said it jokingly, Shekhar said. But her eyes were serious. A chill crept through the room. I began to understand then, he said, that I wasn't just unwanted. I was inconvenient. The word echoed in Mira's mind. By the end of that year, Shekhar said, the house no longer felt like home. It felt like a place I was waiting to be removed from. Mira's voice trembled when she spoke. And you still stayed, Shekhar nodded. He said, because leaving felt like admitting my entire life had been a mistake. Outside, night pressed against the windows. The house was listening, and it already knew how this story would end. Part 3 of Chapter 5. The last weeks of Shekhar's life unfolded with a strange, suffocating slowness. By then, fear had crept into his awareness, not the sharp, immediate kind, but something colder, more deliberate. A sense of being managed, controlled. As if his presence in his own home was being tolerated rather than endured. I started noticing what they didn't bother hiding anymore, Shekhar said. Mira sat perfectly still, afraid that any movement might disturb the fragile thread of his memory. They whispered, he continued. Not quietly, carelessly, like I was furniture. He spoke of standing in the kitchen late at night, listening to Nandini and Vicky talk on the terrace, their voices drifting down the staircase. They planned things, he said. Trips. A future without me. One evening he returned home early again, this time intentionally. I wanted proof, he said. Something undeniable, something I could hold on to when they tried to convince me I was imagining things. The house had been empty when he arrived, quiet in the way that suggested preparation. He went upstairs. On the terrace he found 2 glasses, a bottle of wine, a jacket he didn't own. I didn't confront them, Shekhar said. Not immediately. Instead, he waited. When Nandini returned, she didn't bother explaining. She looked at me like I'd overstayed, he said, like I should have known better than to still be there. That night she didn't sleep in their room. She said she needed space, Shekhar said. She stopped pretending it was temporary. The house grew hostile after that, not in the way it had been with Mira, but in a quieter, more human cruelty. Doors closed pointedly, meals eaten separately. Conversations held just out of earshot. She started provoking me, Shekhar said. Small things, insults, challenges. Mira frowned. Because she wanted me to react, he replied. So I would look unstable, so anything that happened later could be explained. The realization made Mira's stomach twist. She asked me one night if I'd ever fallen from the terrace, Shekhar said. If I thought it would hurt, Mira gasped. She laughed when she said it, he continued. But I didn't laugh back. That was when fear solidified. I began locking my room, Shekhar said. Keeping my phone charged, telling myself I was being dramatic. The night before he died, Shekhar said, the house felt wrong. He said, like it does now when the air presses close. Had cooked dinner, sat across from him, smiled politely. She asked about my day, Shekhar said. It was the first normal conversation we'd had in months. Mira shook her head slowly. She was preparing. Yes, Shekhar said, I see that now. That night Nandini suggested they talk on the terrace. She said we needed closure, Shekhar said, that we owed each other honesty. The word echoed bitterly. I didn't want to go, he admitted, but I was tired of being afraid. The wind had been strong that night, he remembered, the city quiet below, the staircase behind them dark. She stood close, Shekhar said, too close. Vicky appeared from the shadows moments later. I understood then, Shekhar said quietly. Too late, Mira's hands trembled. They didn't argue, Shekhar said, they didn't shout, there was no drama, just a shove from behind. I remember losing my balance, he said, the sensation of falling, of knowing. The stairs rushed up to meet him. I tried to call her name, Shekhar said, not for help, for acknowledgement. He paused, she didn't come down. Mira covered her mouth, tears streaming silently down her face. They waited, Shekhar said. Until I stopped moving. The house seemed to creak faintly as though reacting to the memory. When they told people what happened, Shekhar continued, they were convincing. Grief is easy to perform. The story had ended for the world that night, but not for him. I stayed, Shekhar said, because the lie stayed. Filled the room. Mira looked at the staircase, the same one, the same path. They live freely, she whispered. Yes, Shekhar said, and I am still here. Mira wiped her tears slowly. Then she lifted her head. And they shouldn't, she said. Shekhar met her gaze, something unspoken passed between them. The story of the dead had reached its end. The story of revenge had just begun. Chapter 6, Truths That Hurt More. Part 1 of Chapter 6. Mira did not cry immediately. The night Shekhar finished his story, she sat alone in the living room long after he withdrew into silence. The house felt heavier now, burdened by truth. She stared at the staircase, seeing it not as a structure but as a witness, silent, complicit, patient. Sleep came late and without rest. Morning light exposed everything it touched, stripping the shadows of mystery but not of meaning. Ravi moved through the house as he always did, hurried, distracted, unaware that the ground beneath his marriage had begun to crack. Mira asked, her voice steady. He said absently. She watched him drink it. Watched his eyes flick toward his phone. Watched the ease with which he existed in a reality she no longer shared. When he left for work, she did not feel abandoned, she felt studied. Shekhar appeared near the window once Ravi was gone, his presence subdued, respectful. You don't have to say anything, he said. Mira nodded, but she wanted to hear it anyway. Long, she asked. Shekhar did not pretend not to understand. Since Mumbai, he said, before the transfer. The words slid into place with brutal precision. So Indore, Mira said slowly, wasn't about work. No, Shekhar replied, it was about distance. Mira sat down heavily on the sofa. Her name, she asked. Ria, Shekhar said. They worked together. Mira closed her eyes. Images surfaced uninvited. Ravi packing bags, Ravi claiming pressure, Ravi choosing silence over explanation. She had mistaken avoidance for stress, loyalty for patience. He asked for the transfer for her, Shekhar continued. She didn't want to stay in Mumbai. A sharp, hollow laugh escaped Mira's throat. So I was moved, she said, like furniture. Shekhar did not correct her. They meet when he says he's working late, Shekhar said. Sometimes overnight. Mira's chest tightened painfully. Does she know about me? Mira asked. Yes, the word landed like a verdict. And she still? Yes. The room felt suddenly too small. Mira stood and walked toward the kitchen, needing movement, space, air. Her hands shook as she poured herself a glass of water. How do you know all this? She asked without turning. Shekhar's voice was calm. I notice patterns. I hear names spoken when people think they are alone. Mira pressed her forehead briefly against the cabinet. She's not trying to take him away, Shekhar said. She already has. Mira turned back slowly. And me? She asked. What am I to him now? Shekhar hesitated. A responsibility, he said. A history. Mira nodded. Something inside her hardened, not into anger but into clarity. She returned to the living room and sat down again, her posture straight, composed. If Ravi had been there, he would have thought her calm. He would not have recognized the woman she was becoming. I trusted him, Mira said quietly. I trusted him enough to leave my life behind. Shekhar watched her closely. Trust, Mira continued, is what makes betrayal survivable for the betrayer. She looked up at him. You survived because you couldn't leave, she said. I stayed because I didn't know I needed to. The house seemed to absorb the statement, holding it carefully. Do you want to confront him? Shekhar asked. Mira shook her head. She said, not yet. Why? Because truth without timing is just noise, she replied, and I want him to hear it clearly. Shekhar studied her for a long moment. You're changing, he said. Yes, Mira replied. I finally am. Outside, the afternoon drifted lazily onward, unaware that two lives inside the house had just aligned in purpose. Truth had entered the room, and it was not leaving quietly. Part 2 of Chapter 6. Mira began to watch, not with suspicion, she had already passed that stage, but with a deliberate attentiveness that surprised even her. She noticed things she had once overlooked, details that had always been there but had never demanded interpretation. Ravi's routines, for instance. He showered longer on certain mornings. Took calls on the balcony even when the signal was strong indoors. His excuses had patterns now, meetings clustered too conveniently, deadlines that always seemed to arrive just when Mira needed him most. She no longer questioned him, that was the first thing he noticed. You're quiet, Ravi said one evening, glancing at her across the dinner table. Am I? Mira replied mildly. You don't ask where I'm going anymore. Mira lifted her eyes slowly. Trust you, she said. The words landed perfectly. Ravi smiled, relieved. Shekhar watched from the corner of the room, unseen, his presence steady. Later that night, Ravi's phone buzzed repeatedly. Mira lay beside him, eyes closed, breathing even, listening. Ravi slipped out of bed quietly, moving with practiced ease. The bathroom door clicked shut. His voice dropped to a whisper. I know tomorrow, no, she won't suspect. Mira did not flinch. She stared at the darkness, committing every word to memory. When Ravi returned to bed, she turned toward him, her arm resting lightly across his chest. He stiffened briefly, then relaxed. She smiled into the darkness. Shekhar appeared near the window once Ravi drifted into sleep. You're learning his language, he said quietly. Mira nodded. I spent years unlearning myself for him. This feels balanced. Next day, Ravi announced another trip. 2 days, he said. Outstation. Of course, Mira replied calmly. Travel safe. kissed her cheek, quick, distracted. Mira watched him leave with a strange detachment, as though observing a scene from a life she had already exited. "She'll be there," Shekhar said once Ravi was gone. Mira inhaled slowly. I know. She didn't ask how Shekhar knew. She trusted his awareness now, not blindly but accurately. He noticed things people thought invisible: tone, hesitation, the way names were spoken. "Does she look like me?" Mira asked suddenly. Shekhar paused. He said, "She looks like who he wants to become." Mira absorbed that quietly. "She thinks she's different," Shekhar continued. "That this story won't repeat." Mira smiled faintly. "It always does." That evening, Mira stood in the kitchen, staring at the blank wall above the counter. "I don't want to destroy him," she said. "I want him to see himself." Shekhar studied her. "That takes patience." "I have time," Mira replied. "I gave him years without knowing. He can give me months knowing everything." She reached for a notebook she hadn't touched since leaving Mumbai. Its pages were blank, its spine stiff. She opened it. "What are you doing?" Shekhar asked. "Remembering who I was before I became invisible," Mira said. She wrote slowly at first, ideas, fragments, thoughts about food, flavors, combinations, things she had once loved, things that had nothing to do with Ravi. "Shekhar," she said without looking up, "when your wife betrayed you, what hurt more? The affair or the lie?" "The lie," he answered immediately, "because it made me doubt my reality." Mira nodded. "Then that's where I'll begin." Outside, the evening settled gently over the city. Inside the house, two wounded truths sat side by side, one dead, one awakening, quietly, methodically preparing for balance. Part 3 of Chapter 6. The house felt quieter in the days that followed, not emptier, never that, but steadier, as though it had accepted the role it was meant to play. Mira noticed how naturally Shekhar's presence blended into the rhythm of her days now. He did not intrude. He did not advise unless asked. He watched, listened, remembered, much like she had once done. Ravi returned from his trip lighter than usual. He hummed while changing his shirt, spoke animatedly about work, laughed at messages on his phone. Mira observed it all with calm precision. She cooked his favorite dinner that night, he noticed. "You're in a good mood," Ravi said, smiling as he took a second serving. "Are you?" Mira replied. He chuckled, unguarded. Later, as he slept, Mira sat alone in the living room, notebook open on her lap. The page was no longer blank. Ideas filled it now: menus, packaging, notes, delivery routes, small practical steps toward a future that did not include waiting. "You're planning," Shekhar said softly. Mira replied. "For the first time it feels like I'm planning for myself." She closed the notebook and leaned back against the sofa, staring at the ceiling. "I used to think patience was love," she said. "That enduring quietly meant I was strong." Shekhar remained silent, letting her find her own words. "But strength isn't silence," she continued. "It's choice." She turned to look at him. "I won't expose him yet," she said. "I won't confront her yet." Shekhar nodded. "You're letting the truth ripen." "Yes," Mira said, "because when it does, it won't need my anger to speak." Next morning, Ravi mentioned Ria's name casually over breakfast. "Ria handled that client well," he said, as though testing the air. Mira didn't look up. "I'm glad," she replied. "You always speak highly of her." Ravi froze for half a second, then smiled. "She's competent." Mira met his gaze calmly. "That matters." Silence between them stretched thin, electric. Later, alone again, Mira stood at the base of the staircase. She placed her hand lightly against the wall near the faint crack that marked the beginning of Shekhar's end. "I won't disappear," she whispered. "Not for anyone." Air warmed subtly. Shekhar stood beside her, not looming, not sorrowful, but attentive. "You're doing what I couldn't," he said. Mira shook her head. "You did what you could. I'm just arriving later, with warning." She turned away from the staircase and walked toward the kitchen, toward the notebook, toward the future she was quietly assembling. Behind her, the house remained still. But it was no longer waiting. Chapter 7. The pact. Part 1 of Chapter 7. The idea did not arrive dramatically. There was no sudden declaration, no whispered vow spoken in candlelight. The pact formed the way truths often did, quietly, through repetition, through shared understanding that no longer needed explanation. Mira realized this on a Thursday afternoon while chopping vegetables. The knife moved rhythmically against the board. Chop, pause, chop. The kitchen smelled of coriander and onion, sharp and grounding. Outside, the city went about its ordinary business, unaware that something deliberate was taking shape inside the yellow house at the end of the lane. Shekhar stood near the doorway, watching not the knife but Mira. "You're not angry anymore," he said. Mira didn't look up. "Anger burns too quickly," she replied. "It leaves nothing useful behind." She wiped her hands on a towel and leaned against the counter. "I don't want revenge that looks like revenge," she continued. "I want consequences that look like truth." Shekhar nodded slowly. "That's how it should be," he said. "They destroyed quietly, they should fall the same way." The words settled between them not as a threat but as agreement. They did not speak for a moment. Then Mira asked, "If you could speak to the world again, just once, what would you say?" Shekhar considered this carefully. "I would tell them where to look," he said, "not what to see." Mira smiled faintly. "That's all I need too." That evening Ravi came home earlier than usual. "I might have to travel again next week," he said, loosening his tie. "There's a new project." Mira served dinner calmly. "Of course," she said. "You should focus on your career." Ravi looked at her, surprised. "You're very understanding these days." She met his gaze evenly. "I've always been understanding." He smiled, satisfied. Shekhar watched from the shadows, his expression unreadable. Later that night, once Ravi had fallen asleep, Mira returned to the living room. She sat cross-legged on the floor, notebook open before her, pages filled now with plans, some practical, some abstract. Shekhar appeared opposite her, settling into the space like a thought she had been expecting. "I can't leave this house," he said quietly. "But I can remember everything." Mira nodded. "And I can move freely," she replied. "Ask questions, connect dots." "That's the pact," Shekhar said. "Memory and movement." They looked at each other, then really looked. "This doesn't end with them punished," Mira said. "It ends with us free." Shekhar's voice was steady. "I don't need them to suffer," he said. "I need the lie to die." Mira closed the notebook. "Then we agree," she said. Shekhar inclined his head. The house creaked softly, not in warning but in acknowledgement. From that night onward, things began to change, small things at first. Ravi grew careless. Nandini's name surfaced once accidentally in a late-night phone call Shekhar overheard through the walls. Vicky's voice echoed faintly in memory, tied to dates and places Shekhar had never forgotten. Mira listened. Stored, waited, she did not rush. Pacts built on patience lasted longer. Part 2 of Chapter 7, they did not call it revenge. That word was too loud, too reckless. It implied impulse, blood, exposure without thought. What Mira and Shekhar were building required discipline, rules. "The first rule," Mira said one evening, sitting at the dining table with her notebook open, "is patience." Shekhar stood near the staircase, the shadows folding around him like a familiar cloak. "They lived freely for 10 years, he said. "We can wait longer than they expect." Mira nodded. "The second rule," she continued, "is invisibility." She underlined the word. "Sudden changes, no dramatic confrontations. Ravi must believe nothing has shifted." Shekhar's mouth curved slightly. "He already does." Mira's pen paused. "And the third rule," she said slowly, "is truth without interpretation." She looked up. "We don't accuse, we reveal. Let the facts speak so clearly that denial becomes impossible." Shekhar regarded her with something close to admiration. "You've thought about this," he said. "I've lived quietly for years," Mira replied. "You learn strategy when you're ignored." From that night onward they began assembling the past. Shekhar remembered details no police report had ever captured, exact dates, casual remarks, overlooked visitors. He recalled neighbors who had heard arguments but dismissed them. A security guard who had been on duty the night he died. A broker who had sold the house too quickly. "They rushed," Shekhar said. "That's where they failed." Mira wrote everything down, names, places, gaps. During the day she began testing the present. She asked Ravi small, harmless questions. "Do you remember the old house you lived in before Mumbai?" she asked one morning. He frowned briefly. "No, why? Just curious," she replied lightly. He shrugged and returned to his phone. Shekhar's voice drifted from the hallway. "He avoids the past." Mira smiled faintly. "Good, then he won't see it coming." She began visiting the local market more often, striking up casual conversations. She listened more than she spoke. People talked when they weren't being interrogated. One afternoon, an elderly neighbor mentioned the previous owner of the house. "Sad story," the woman said. "Poor man fell down the stairs." Mira kept her expression neutral. "Accidents happen," she replied. The woman said, "But not all accidents are simple." Mira felt Shekhar's presence sharpen beside her. Back home, Mira stood at the base of the staircase again. "They remember," she said softly. "They always do." Shekhar replied, "They just need permission to speak." Ravi grew increasingly careless as weeks passed. His lies softened, became repetitive. He assumed Mira's silence was submission. One night he left his laptop open on the dining table. Mira didn't rush to it. She waited until he slept. She didn't search messages. She didn't scroll desperately. She observed file names, travel receipts, email timestamps, patterns. Shekhar stood close, reading memory where Mira read fact. "This isn't about catching him," Mira whispered. "It's about understanding how deep it goes. And when you understand," Shekhar said, "you'll know where to press." Mira closed the laptop gently and returned it exactly as she found it. She lay beside Ravi that night, listening to his steady breathing. For the first time she felt no desire to wake him. The pact was working, not because anyone was suffering, but because the lie was beginning to feel crowded. Part 3 of Chapter 7, the first consequence was almost invisible. That was why it worked. It began with a phone call Ravi didn't expect. Mira was in the kitchen when his phone rang that evening. He glanced at the screen, frowned, then stepped into the balcony to answer. His voice dropped instinctively, irritation sharpening his words. "Yes, I know, but that's not what we discussed." Mira continued stirring the curry, her movements unhurried. Shekhar stood near the doorway, listening not to the words but to the tension tightening Ravi's shoulders. "He's being questioned," Shekhar said softly. "About work?" Mira asked. Shekhar replied. "About history." Ravi returned inside 10 minutes later, his expression carefully neutral but his jaw set. "Okay," Mira asked lightly. "Yeah," he said too quickly. "Just office nonsense." She smiled and set the table. That night Ravi barely slept. He turned repeatedly, checked his phone at odd hours, muttered to himself when he thought Mira was asleep. She lay still, breathing evenly, letting his unease bloom without interference. In the days that followed, the ripple spread. A colleague asked Ravi an unexpected question about his Mumbai transfer. A document he assumed forgotten resurfaced. A casual reference to an old address unsettled him more than it should have. Mira watched him lose rhythm. She did not cause these events directly. She merely rearranged attention. A call to an old housing association. A forwarded email with a vague question attached. A mention dropped into a conversation at the market, carried unknowingly by someone else. Truth did the rest. "You've changed," Ravi said one night, watching her closely. Mira met his gaze calmly. "We all do," she replied. "Some of us just notice it sooner." Looked away, Shekhar observed the scene with quiet intensity. "He's starting to feel watched," he said later. Mira nodded. "That's what lies fear most, attention." The house responded subtly. The staircase creaked at night again, not with menace but insistence. The faint stain beneath the paint darkened slightly, as though memory were pressing closer to the surface. "Restless," Shekhar said. "All of them, even the past." Mira stood at the base of the stairs, her palm resting against the wall. "I won't rush," she said, "but I won't stop either." That night she opened her notebook to a fresh page. She wrote one sentence: "When the truth arrives, it should look like coincidence." She closed the notebook and placed it back in the drawer. In the bedroom, Ravi slept fitfully, his dreams no longer peaceful. Mira lay beside him, awake, listening to the subtle shifts in his breathing. For the first time since moving into the house, she felt no fear of the shadows. They were no longer hiding anything. Chapter 8, The Fall of the Living. Part 1 of Chapter 8, the first thing to fall was certainty. Ravi noticed it in small, irritating ways at first. Emails that went unanswered, meetings that were suddenly rescheduled without explanation, colleagues who hesitated before responding to his jokes. Nothing overt, nothing he could confront, just friction. Mira observed him from a distance, careful not to alter her behavior. She moved through the house with the same calm attentiveness she had cultivated over weeks, offering meals, listening when spoken to, never asking questions that could expose intent. The difference lay not in what she did, but in what she no longer gave: trust. One evening, Ravi returned home visibly agitated. "They're reviewing old project allocations," he said, packing the living room. "From Mumbai." Mira set 2 cups of tea on the table. "That sounds thorough," she replied mildly. Ravi shot her a glance. "It's unnecessary." She met his eyes. "Sometimes," she said, "people look back when they're unsure about what's ahead." The words lingered longer than she intended. Ravi stopped packing. "What do you mean by that?" "Nothing," Mira said gently. "Just a thought." He studied her for a moment, then shook his head and walked away. Shekhar stood near the staircase, watching the exchange. "He's beginning to feel exposed," he said quietly. Mira nodded. "That's the beginning of the fall, not punishment, uncertainty." The second thing to fall was coordination. Ria began calling Ravi at odd hours, her voice sharp with irritation. Mira overheard fragments through the walls, complaints about pressure, about scrutiny, about someone asking the wrong questions. "They're watching us," Ria hissed during one late-night call. Ravi's voice was strained. "You're imagining things." Mira closed her eyes, listening. Shekhar appeared beside her. "She's afraid," he said. "She's never been good at hiding." "Makes people careless," Mira replied. The third thing to fall was control. One afternoon, Mira received an unexpected call. It was from a woman who introduced herself as part of a legal consultancy firm conducting background verifications for a property dispute. "We're revisiting a case from about 10 years ago," the woman said. "House sold under unusual circumstances." Mira felt her pulse quicken, but her voice remained steady. "I see," she replied. "How can I help? We were told you currently reside there." "Yes, we might need to ask a few questions." Mira glanced toward the staircase. "We'll cooperate fully," she said. When the call ended, she sat down slowly, her hands resting flat on her knees. "It's begun," she whispered. Shekhar's expression was solemn but peaceful. "They thought time erased the truth," he said. They were wrong. That evening, Ravi arrived home pale and distracted. You spoke to someone today, he said abruptly. Mira looked up from the kitchen. Yes, about the house. Yes, his face tightened. Why didn't you tell me? She met his gaze calmly. You didn't ask. Silence between them stretched thin, sharp. Ravi looked away first. Upstairs, the staircase creaked faintly, not in warning, in remembrance. Part 2 of Chapter 8. Nandini did not expect the call. It came on a quiet afternoon, cutting through the carefully curated life she had built over the past decade. The number was unfamiliar. She almost didn't answer it, almost. This is regarding a property transaction from 10 years ago, the voice on the other end said. A house in Indore. Nandini's hand tightened around the phone. I don't know what you're talking about, she replied quickly. That's interesting, the woman said calmly. Because your name appears multiple times in the original documents. The line went dead. Nandini stood frozen in her living room, heart pounding violently. The walls around her, newer, brighter, safer, suddenly felt unreliable. She called Vicky immediately. They're asking questions, she said, her voice low and urgent. About the house. Vicky laughed. Relax, that was years ago. They called me by name, she snapped. They know. The laughter faded. Meanwhile, Ravi's unease had evolved into paranoia. He checked locks twice before sleeping, deleted call logs obsessively, flinched when his phone rang unexpectedly. Mira noticed it all, her observations precise, unemotional. You're restless, she said one night, placing a glass of water beside him. Work, Ravi muttered. Still, he didn't answer. Shekhar appeared beside the staircase, his presence sharper now, more defined. The remembering, he said. Good, Mira replied softly. Memory is inconvenient. The legal inquiry widened. A former neighbor was contacted, then another. Small inconsistencies emerged, details that didn't align, timelines that didn't quite match. The story of a simple accident began to strain under its own weight. One evening, Mira overheard Ravi on the phone, his voice barely contained. Why would they reopen something like that? He hissed, it has nothing to do with us. Mira paused in the hallway as she continued walking, her footsteps measured. She's pressuring him, Shekhar said later. Ria wants him to distance himself. From me, Mira asked. Shekhar replied. From the past, Mira smiled faintly. That's impossible. A week later, Ravi came home late, his shirt wrinkled, his eyes bloodshot. They asked me questions, he said abruptly, as though confessing. Mira looked up from her notebook. Who did? Some legal people, about this house. She closed the notebook slowly. And what did you say? That I didn't know anything, he replied. Because I don't. The lie sat between them, exposed but untouched. Mira nodded. That's probably best. Ravi stared at her. You're not worried? She met his gaze steadily. Should I be? He looked away. That night the house felt charged, alive with memory. The staircase creaked repeatedly, the faint stain beneath the wall seeming darker, more insistent. They're circling, Shekhar said. They can't escape it now. Mira stood beside him, her reflection faint in the darkened window. I don't want them destroyed, she said. I want them seen. Shekhar inclined his head. That's enough. Outside, far away, Nandini stared at her phone, rereading messages from an unknown number. Questions she had never expected to answer again. The past had found her, and it wasn't asking permission. Part 3 of Chapter 8. The break did not come from the police, it came from memory. A week after the first legal inquiries, a local newspaper published a small piece, barely a column, about unresolved property disputes in Indore. It was not sensational, it did not name names. But it mentioned a house. A decade-old accidental death involving a fall from a residential staircase is being reviewed following discrepancies in property transfer documents. Mira read it slowly, once, then again. Ravi read it standing behind her. His silence was immediate and absolute. That's ridiculous, he said finally, though his voice lacked conviction. They review dozens of cases. Mira folded the paper carefully and placed it on the table. Yes, she said, but not all of them involve death. Ravi's jaw tightened. That evening, Ravi received a call he couldn't avoid. Mira heard his voice rise from the balcony, sharp with panic. I don't know them personally. I rented the place later. Yes, of course, I'll cooperate. Ended the call abruptly and stood there for a long time before coming inside. They want me to come in, he said, for questioning. Yes, Mira nodded calmly. That makes sense. Stared at her as though seeing her clearly for the first time. You're not reacting, he said. Don't you understand what this could mean? She met his gaze evenly. I understand exactly what it means. Looked away, Shekhar stood near the staircase, his presence steady, almost solemn. They've started telling the story aloud, he said. It won't stop now. That night, Ravi barely ate. He paced the house, his movements erratic, his confidence eroding with every step. Do you think they'll reopen it fully? He asked suddenly. Mira took a sip of water before answering. If the story doesn't hold, she said, they won't have a choice. If they find nothing, he pressed. She looked at him, then really looked. Then nothing will happen, she said gently. Truth isn't afraid of being examined. The words landed hard. Ravi slept poorly. At dawn he left for the questioning, his shoulders hunched, his steps uneven. Mira watched him go without following. When the house fell silent again, Shekhar appeared beside her. This is where it turns, he said. Yes, Mira replied. From private to public. Questioning did not end in arrests, it didn't need to. Inconsistencies were noted. Statements were recorded. Names were added to files that had long been closed. The past was no longer a rumor, it was a document. That evening, Ravi returned looking hollowed out. They asked about Nandini, he said quietly. Mira's pulse quickened, but her face remained calm. And they wanted to know if I'd ever met her. Mira waited. I said no, Ravi finished. But I don't think they believed me. Filled the room, Shekhar moved closer, his voice barely a breath. They never do, he said. Later that night, Mira stood at the staircase again, her fingers resting lightly against the wall. It's happening, she whispered. Yes, Shekhar replied, but this isn't the end. Mira nodded. I know, she said. This is just the fall. Outside, the city continued its ordinary rhythm, cars passing, lights blinking on and off. Inside the house, something long buried had finally broken the surface. And it would not sink back down. Chapter 9, Liberation, Part 1 of Chapter 9. Mira knew the moment before Ravi did. It arrived as a quiet shift in the house, subtle, unmistakable. The air no longer felt tense or watchful. It felt resolved, like a breath finally released after being held too long. Shekhar stood near the staircase, his presence steadier than it had ever been. It's close, he said. Mira nodded. I can feel it. Ravi came home late that evening, exhaustion etched into every line of his face. He didn't remove his shoes immediately. He stood near the door as though uncertain whether to enter fully. They're reopening the case, he said finally. Mira didn't respond right away. She finished placing the plates on the table, her movements calm, deliberate. When? She asked. Official notice will come, Ravi said. Soon. She looked at him then, not with accusation, not with sorrow, but with clarity. Sit, she said. The word was gentle, unavoidable. Ravi obeyed without realizing he had. They asked about your transfer, Mira continued. About Mumbai, about timing. Ravi swallowed. I told them it was work, Mira nodded. That's what you told me too. Silence between them deepened, stretching until it could no longer support pretense. Mira, Ravi began, his voice low, you have to understand. I understand, she said quietly. That's why this conversation is happening now, not earlier. Looked at her, truly alarmed for the first time. How long have you known? He asked. She considered the question. Long enough, she replied. The truth hovered between them, no longer threatening, no longer hidden. Ravi ran a hand through his hair. I never meant for this to hurt you, Mira smiled faintly. That's what people say when they mean to avoid responsibility. His shoulders sagged. It just happened, he said weakly. Mira replied. It unfolded carefully, repeatedly. Shekhar watched silently, his presence now almost imperceptible, as though he were already loosening his hold on the house. They asked me about Ria, Ravi said, barely audible. Mira felt the name settle without impact. She asked. They know, he admitted. About us. Mira nodded once. Good, she said. Ravi looked up sharply. Good, yes, she replied, because secrets rot, exposure disinfects. The word stunned him. You're not angry, he said. I was, Mira replied, but anger finished its work. She stood. I'm not here to punish you, she continued. That will happen on its own. She walked toward the staircase and stopped halfway. I'm here to leave, she said. The sentence landed with quiet finality. Ravi stood abruptly. Leave, Mira, wait. No, she said, turning back to him. I waited enough. Shekhar appeared beside her then, not looming, not demanding, just present. Ravi blinked, shaken, as if sensing something he could not see. Mira, Ravi said, his voice breaking, don't do this. She met his eyes calmly. I already did. She walked upstairs to pack a small bag, not hurriedly, not dramatically, just what she needed. When she returned, Ravi was still standing in the same place. I hope you tell the truth, Mira said softly. For yourself, not for me. She opened the door. As she stepped outside, the house behind her creaked softly once, not in grief, in release. Part 2 of Chapter 9. Mira spent the night at a small guest house near the old market. It wasn't comfortable. The bed creaked, the fan rattled, and the walls were thin enough to let in the sounds of strangers living lives that had nothing to do with hers. And yet she slept deeply, without dreams. For the first time in months, no one watched her from the shadows. When she woke, the phone on the bedside table was already vibrating. It was Ravi. She let it ring. The second call came an hour later. Then messages, apologies layered over panic, explanations collapsing into pleas. Mira read none of them. She turned the phone face down and went downstairs for tea. Freedom, she realized, did not feel like triumph. It felt like quiet. Across the city, the past was unraveling rapidly. The reopened investigation moved faster than anyone expected. not because of new evidence alone but because of accumulated doubt. Statements contradicted one another, dates shifted, stories thinned under scrutiny. Nandini arrived at the police station flanked by a lawyer whose confidence evaporated with every question asked. She was nervous, Shekhar said later, his voice echoing faintly in Mira's mind. She always is when she has to repeat the lie. Vicky fared worse, he spoke too much, tried to explain details no one had asked about, corrected timelines unnecessarily. In doing so, he exposed the seams in the narrative they had stitched together 10 years earlier. They're not confessing. Mira said quietly, standing near the window of her guesthouse room. They don't need to, Shekhar replied. The truth doesn't require permission anymore. By afternoon, the story had spread beyond legal circles. Neighbors spoke. Old acquaintances remembered things they had once dismissed. A security guard recalled a shout he had assumed was laughter. A broker admitted the sale had been rushed. The house, his house, had finally been heard. That evening, Mira returned to the lane for the last time. The yellow house stood exactly as it always had, unchanged, unremarkable, anonymous to anyone who didn't know its history. She paused at the gate, her hand resting lightly on the iron bars. Shekhar stood beside her, clearer than he had ever been. This is where I stop, he said. Mira nodded, her throat tight. And I go on? Yes, he replied. That's how it should be. She stepped inside once more. The house felt empty now, not abandoned but complete. The staircase no longer radiated cold, the air no longer pressed close. Even the faint stain on the wall seemed lighter, as though time had finally been allowed to move forward. I used to think I needed them punished, Shekhar said, but I only needed the truth acknowledged. Mira placed her palm against the wall one last time. You mattered, she said softly. Your life wasn't erased. Shekhar smiled then, not sadly, not bitterly, freely. I see it now, he said. Thank you. Air shifted gently, not dramatically, not violently, just enough, and then he was gone, not withdrawn, not hidden, gone. Mira stood alone in the living room, tears slipping silently down her face. She did not sob, she did not collapse, she breathed. When she stepped outside again and closed the gate behind her, the house remained still, at peace. Chapter 10, a kitchen of her own. Part 1 of Chapter 10. Mira's new mornings began without alarms. She woke when light reached the window, soft, indirect, unhurried. The room she rented above a small tailoring shop smelled faintly of starch and detergent, grounding scents that belonged to work, not memory. There was no staircase here, no shadows with opinions, just space. She sat up slowly, stretching muscles that no longer clenched in anticipation. For the first time in years, she noticed how quiet her body felt, not tired, not alert, simply present. In the corner of the room stood a folding table. On it lay her notebook, now thick with pages. She ran her fingers over the cover, not opening it yet. There was time. Downstairs, the tailor greeted her with a nod and poured tea without asking. Mira accepted it with a small smile and stepped outside. The city hummed gently, autos passing, shop shutters rising, vendors arranging vegetables with practiced hands. Life did not wait for grief. That realization no longer hurt. She walked to the rented kitchen space she had secured a week earlier. Nothing grand, just a clean room with a stove, 2 counters and windows that let sunlight in generously. The landlord had been curious but not intrusive. You cook? He had asked. Mira had replied. And I remember flavors. That had been enough. She tied her hair back and washed her hands, the water warm and reassuring. Ingredients waited patiently on the counter, onions, tomatoes, spices lined neatly in small steel containers. Familiar, comforting, she began with something simple, a dish her mother had taught her, adapted over years of quiet experimentation. As the pan heated and oil shimmered, Mira felt something settle inside her, a sense of alignment she hadn't known she was missing. Cooking, she realized, was not about feeding others. It was about presence. Her phone buzzed, a message from Ravi. She did not open it. Instead, she focused on the sound of cumin seeds blooming in oil, the sharp fragrance filling the room. She tasted, adjusted, tasted again. Outside, the world moved forward. Inside, she claimed her place in it. By noon, the first order arrived through the food app, modest, cautious, like her beginnings. She packed it carefully, her hands steady, her movements sure. When the delivery driver left, Mira leaned against the counter and closed her eyes briefly. No one was watching, and she was not waiting. Part 2 of Chapter 10. The kitchen grew busier by the end of the month, not overwhelmingly so, just enough to establish rhythm. Orders arrived in small waves, predictable in their unpredictability. Mira learned which afternoons were quiet and which evenings demanded urgency. She adjusted her prep times, refined her menu, listened to feedback without letting it define her. She liked that. No one expected perfection from her anymore. One afternoon, while sealing a delivery bag, her phone rang. Ravi. She stared at the screen for a long moment before answering. She said, I heard you started something, he said, trying to sound casual. A business? Yes, Mira replied. That's good, he said, uncertain. I'm glad you're okay. She leaned against the counter, the hum of the exhaust fan filling the pause. I am, she said. I hope you are too. He hesitated. They questioned Ria again. I know, Mira replied calmly. She's leaving the company, he continued. It's messy. Mira closed her eyes briefly, not in pain but in acceptance. I'm not part of that story anymore, she said. Another silence. I never thought you'd leave like that, Ravi said finally. I didn't leave suddenly, Mira replied. I left after arriving fully. When the call ended, she set the phone aside without lingering. There was nothing left to say. Weeks passed. The kitchen gained regular customers, people who recognized consistency, not performance. Mira hired help part-time, taught them her methods patiently without the fear of being replaced or overlooked. At night she returned to her rented room tired but unburdened. She slept deeply, dreamed rarely. Sometimes, when the city quieted and the light angled just right, she thought of the yellow house in Indore, not with fear, not even with sadness, just acknowledgement. One evening she found herself cooking the same dish she had made on her first day, this time without measuring, without checking notes. Her hands remembered, her instincts guided. As she tasted the final preparation, she smiled softly. It was right. Outside, rain began to fall lightly, tapping against the windows. Mira watched it for a moment, then returned to her work. She no longer needed signs, no voices followed her, no shadows lingered. The dead had been heard, the living had learned. And Mira finally belonged to herself.